Welcome to another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. You're listening to a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State, featuring writer, poet, and musician Rick Pidcock. Now here's Rick.
It's July 4th weekend, where many churches will be hosting patriotic-themed worship services. And one of the common features of these services, along with all the other U.S. government-sponsored revival services going on this summer in connection with the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, is the making of myths around our nation's origin. Two of the primary men responsible for spreading these false myths are Eric Metaxas and Tim Barton, who many on the right consider to be historians. In fact, both men were at the FreedomCon conference last week that was organized by the likes of Mark Driscoll, Russell Johnson, and Josh Howerton. One of the scholars who has been instrumental in combating their lies is Warren Throckmorton, author of The Christian Past That Wasn't, debunking the Christian nationalist myths that hijack history. You may recall I interviewed him for episode 118 of Highest Power, Church and State. Historian Kristen Kobes-Dumais recommended my interview with Throckmorton in her Substack piece this week. And regarding Throckmorton, she said, quote, "Warren Throckmorton has been fighting this battle for a long time. A retired psychology professor at Grove City College, Throckmorton has been on a long-time crusade to expose the falsehoods perpetuated by those promoting the myth of Christian America, most notably David Barton. In 2012, Barton published the book The Jefferson Lies, a book that attempted to paint the Founding Fathers as sympathetic to Orthodox Christianity. But Barton's book was itself full of lies. A number of professional historians called out these misrepresentations and fabrications, but it wasn't until conservative Christian scholars like Throckmorton and his co-author Michael Coulter weighed in that the critiques gained traction inside Christian spaces, leading Christian publisher Thomas Nelson to withdraw Barton's book, conceding that basic truths just were not there. Agreeing with Throckmorton, the publisher acknowledged that the criticisms were correct. There were historical details, matters of fact, not matters of opinion, that were not supported at all. When Thomas Nelson withdrew the book from publication, the rights reverted to Barton, and he republished the book himself. 14 years later, the controversy seems almost quaint. That historians and critics, including Christians, could successfully push back against Christian nationalist propaganda feels like a storyline from a different era entirely. Today, one of Barton's acolytes is the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and Freedom 250 is pushing a right-wing Christian America narrative as part of its larger efforts to recast the narrative of America's past during the celebration of its semi-quincentennial. To his great credit, Throckmorton hasn't thrown in the towel. I'm having Throckmorton back on the show for today's episode because now Barton has been spreading lies about the Declaration of Independence, which our nation celebrates on July 4th. So here with me to discuss the myths being spread by David Barton is Warren Throckmorton. You recently wrote a piece to deal with some myths that were being promoted by David and Tim Barton. Before we get into what you wanted to respond to, who are David and Tim Barton, and how do they fit into this world of Christian nationalism today?
Okay. Well, I'll try to be brief. I did an entire season of a podcast on David Barton. David is the elder Barton. Tim is his son. David Barton got started in Christian nationalist history in 1989, so he's been around a while. And I did a podcast series called Telling Jefferson Lies, 3 years ago now. I'm on the third season, where I basically took quite a few sessions to talk about just who he was and who he is, rather, and what he's about and what he's after, what he's trying to do. But in 1989, he wrote his first book. He said God told him to look for look up SAT results and various other social science data, and also the where they started to change, where they started to go down. And he made his first sort of foray into public policy by claiming that SAT scores and various other social ills all declined because of the 1960s decisions against school prayer and Bible reading or religious exercises in schools. He said that the volume of prayer decreased. And so because of that, all of these negative social conditions occurred. He never really said if it was volume in terms of loudness or the number of prayers or what exactly, but he made this case, and he looked actually it's correlation. Correlation, of course, doesn't imply causation. So there were a lot of things going on in the 60s that might help explain some of these things that were taking place. But what he couldn't do was explain why all of this peaked in the 90s, like the violence and death rate and so forth peaked in the 90s, but then started going down. Nothing had changed at the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. There was no, reversal in allowing schools to have prayer and Bible reading and so forth. But everything started to go down again. And even into today, they keep saying how bad things are. The Christian nationalists do. But the crime rates are down, murder rates are down, all these bad things are down. But so he stopped doing that a lot. He stopped pointing to those kind of things because he can't sustain it. But anyway, that was his first foray. Then he started getting into history and making claims about America's godly heritage. Well, he started with a book claiming to prove that America was founded as a Christian nation. And pretty quickly, historians said, well, you've got about 14, 15 quotes in your book that don't go anywhere. They don't, you say that one founder or another said these things, but we can't find any of this stuff in their writings. Mm-hmm. And so he had to withdraw that book. And then he brought another book out called Original Intent. And it's been one thing after another with him. But his material is useful, it's beneficial to religious right or Christian nationalist organizations. And so he's become very popular. Now, fast forward to 2012, he brought out a book on Thomas Jefferson. It was, I believe, his first book by a major publisher. Most of his other books had been published by his Wall Builders organization. Anyway, that book was on Thomas Jefferson, published by Thomas Nelson. Well, at the time, a professor, co-author of mine, and I brought out a book contesting his findings. We called our book Getting Jefferson Right. His book was called The Jefferson Lies. I mean, a book couldn't have been more appropriately named. I mean, ironically named than The Jefferson Lies. Anyway, that came out in, April, I guess. Our book came out in May. But by August, the publisher decided to take that book off the market. Basically just quit publishing it, quit selling it. They didn't even sell what they had. They just stopped. And they said it was because they lost confidence in the book's facts. And you would think, any historian, if they had a book pulled because of historical errors, that would be, it for their career. But not Mr. Barton. He just kept on going, persistent, and, blamed political correctness and basically blamed the libs, for this. And the conservatives bought it. They just continued to follow him and believe his stories and his slant on things, to the point where he is a favorite of Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. He's been very involved in the America 250. Now, that may not be precise. Whichever group it is at the White House is, I know there's an America 250, I think that's actually an official congressional bipartisan thing. But anyway, whatever it is the White House is doing, that's more propagandistic. That's what he's involved in.
Interesting.
And he's been, right in the thick of that. And his son now is David's getting up in years a little bit, and his son has come along, Tim, to sort of take over for Dad, and I think he might be president of Wall Builders now officially. But they travel around still together and do these talks for churches, and that's, I think, what brought me to you today is one of the claims that he made in a church about the Declaration of Independence.
So what was it that they were discussing in this particular conversation that you wanted to address that you wrote about?
Well, um, we're getting close in time to, or the period of time in this year where the Declaration of Independence is on everybody's mind. And so I think that they thought this would be of real interest to people. And I want to read this because I don't want to get it wrong. So, I have this here. They were talking to an audience at World Outreach Church. This is a church of Alan Jackson as the pastor.
Not the country star?
What's that?
Not
No,
the country star?
I don't think he doubles as a country singer.
Okay.
It's in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And he's been there, before. This is a church that puts Christian nationalism history in front of their people, I guess, regularly. And Tim Barton held up a book, and he said it was a couple of sermons by a Congregationalist preacher in the early 1700s named John Wise. Now, John Wise was a Congregationalist preacher, and he did write a couple of sermons or a couple of essays at the time. They're pretty long for sermons. And in these essays, they do talk a lot about natural rights. But Tim Barton said that here's something about them, and here's what he said. He said, it's interesting because in one of those two sermons, John Wise, and I quote, and that's a pretty important part of this, and I quote, says, quote, all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, end quote. Then he paused in front of the crowd, waiting for a reaction because he should have gotten one. The crowd's actually kind of silent in this video. And you'd think that they'd be going, what? Oh my goodness. You mean Jefferson plagiarized this guy from the early 1700s and took these exact phrases? Maybe people in the audience didn't know their declaration. I don't know. But anyway, Barton, after a pause, said, that's in the Declaration. And so, the claim is that Jefferson, who's the main writer, but of course he had some editing from the committee members, John Adams and Dickinson and some others, Ben Franklin. And the claim is that they just took this stuff right out of the sermons or these essays by John Wise. Well, just to get to the punchline, it's not true. He didn't quote John Wise. John Wise had a lot of good things to say about natural rights. In fact, for a Congregationalist minister, they're positively enlightened. And the reason for that is because, and he said it right in his essay, I'm taking this information, this what I'm saying about natural rights from Samuel Pufendorf. Now, Pufendorf is not a household name, I'm sure. Maybe very few of your listeners have ever heard of him. He was a German-Swedish philosopher in the 1600s, but he was a big deal at the time and writing about natural rights. And Jefferson had heard of Pufendorf. He read him, owned his books. But Jefferson didn't own any books by Wise, but it doesn't matter anyway, because what Barton said was that those exact phrases, all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. I mean, those are some of the most stirring words ever written about natural rights.
Yeah.
And Tim Barton is saying that John Wise wrote those first. And that our founders just basically plagiarized them. Well, that's not what happened.
So why would he say Wise wrote? What was it about Wise that would make him want to cast Wise as this person that the founders
Hmm.
idolized?
Well, it's not about history. It's about creating a narrative. The idea that what animated the revolution, the principles, that animated the revolution were Orthodox Christian. Now, you notice that Tim Barton didn't say John Wise, who borrowed from Samuel Pufendorf, John Wise, who was a minister in a sermon, said these things. And so what he's hoping that his audience will think is that, well, of course, then we're a Christian nation. Of course, this nation was meant to be for, white Protestant Christians. Look at the beginning of it. I mean, the whole idea of Declaration of Independence, our natural rights, didn't come from the Enlightenment. It comes from, God. It comes from Orthodox Christianity. And that's a narrative they'd like to create, is that if that's how it was at the beginning, well, that's how it should be now.
Yeah, it reminds me of when I went to DC last month. Um, it's all running together in my head right now for the Rededicate 250 weekend,
Mm,
and where the Trump administration rededicated the nation to being under God. Sean Foyt, the day before at his event, he thanked God for how God moved on the reservations and in the colonies. Eric Metaxas said the founders were all fire-breathing, born-again believers, and even those that weren't agreed with all the doctrines without naming what those doctrines really were.
mm.
Bishop Robert Barron said the founding fathers were biblical Christians almost to a man. It's like it is everywhere right now. It's
Mm.
all of these different supposed historians and pastors. They all are saying the same thing. Like they were all a bunch of inerrantists basically who founded the nation.
They want this, well, they want to communicate to their listeners that Orthodox Christianity, Protestant Christianity, even the Catholic fellow, the priest, um, is glossing over the very real differences and the incredible persecution that Catholics faced. I mean, it's incredible to me that he could say that, given the state of affairs for Catholics in the colonial period and the early part of the country. But they want this to be in the DNA. This meaning the orthodoxy of Christian thought. It's really a threat to them to think that the Enlightenment, had something to do with it, or that there was some mixture of Enlightenment ideas and Christian theology. You mentioned, or you wanted me to talk about Barton. Well, the whole idea of the Jefferson Lies book back in 2012 was to make Thomas Jefferson, or at least throw doubt into the idea that Thomas Jefferson was unorthodox. Many people will not try to make Jefferson into a founder evangelicals can love, but Barton tried really hard. And, in fact, he didn't believe in the deity of Christ. He didn't believe in the resurrection. Quite a few of the founders had doubts about those things, and they saw religion through the eyes of reason. They were very affected by the Enlightenment. And so this mission, this quest in the part of present day, and you really do, you're right, you really see it. The closer we get to the 4th of July this year, the more you're hearing it, is that, they were all Orthodox Christians that would fit in any church. But, in fact, when you look at their statements and so forth, very few of them would actually fit into any evangelical church today.
Yeah. It's interesting because, like, even in non-political conversations, like on the theology side of things,
Hmm.
I notice this line of reasoning used a lot where they'll say, well, what we believe is historic Christianity. It's what Christians have always believed. And it's like there's no awareness that how much Christian theology has evolved over time, how
Right,
culturally situated a lot of their most basic assumptions are.
right, right. And right, there's a good among historians. There's a good bit church history or not. There's a good bit of question about whether you can draw a through line from today's evangelicalism to the colonial period or the constitutional period. Uh, were there even any evangelicals really at that time in the way that we think about them today?
Hmm.
And so but here, let me just take a little different direction a second. To me, and I take this position in my new book, The Christian Past That Wasn't, the affiliation or the beliefs of the founders really don't matter that much. Now, let me explain why I say that. What really matters for our system of government and what kind of nation we are is what they did when they crafted the founding documents. When they crafted the Declaration, they did mention God, nature's God, and most of them did believe in some sort of deity that they didn't want to offend that deity. I mean, it's almost like, people on the island, oh, we hope we don't offend God. We need his help here. But it's not Jehovah. It's not the Christian God. It's nature's God, and they believed in a kind of a providence, but they didn't include Jesus. This was not a Christian declaration of independence. It could have been. They knew how to write that. They had a lot of state constitutions that some of them had Jesus Christ in it,
Hmm.
but they didn't do that. And here, even more importantly, to our actual system of government, when they got to Philadelphia in the summer of 1787, what did all those religious guys do? They didn't craft a Christian government. They didn't even mention God in the document. There's no mention of Jesus or God of any kind. The only mention of religion is to say we're not going to use religion as a test for service in the new government. How can you have a Christian nation if you can't have Christian politicians or officers? You can't ensure that. People could be of any religion or no religion and be elected to this federal government. And they made sure of that by the no religious test clause. They could have written it. Nobody said, if you want to do a Christian government, don't mention God. The idea that was somehow a Christian document is absurd. And many of the people at the time knew that because they didn't like the document. Many people at the time said this document is, where's the religion? Where's the mention of God?
Yeah.
So they knew it at the time. And our current Christian nationalists, they try every way they can to make that of no consequence, but it's a big consequence how they actually wrote the system.
So, and correct me if I misunderstood this part of your article, but my understanding was, and this felt very ironic to me, was that Tim Barton said that John Wise taught that God's preferred form of government was consent of the governed, and that taxation without representation is tyranny.
That's right.
And okay, so it's really ironic to me because when you look at the Christian Nationalist Project today, they aren't concerned about consent of the governed, and they aren't concerned about taxation without representation. To the contrary, all they would just want a bunch of authority with no accountability.
And they'd like to take my tax dollars and pay for their Christian education. Oh, it's that's a great observation. Uh, Wise, I looked for indications when I was reading through those essays, where was he on church and state? Because Pufendorf was a separationist. He believed in keeping church and state separate. And I thought maybe Wise did as well. And it's kind of hard to tell. He really didn't write very clearly about that. But you're right. He did. That's accurate to say that the consent of the governed was a part of, it was at least implied in those essays by Wise. Wise was very strong on the equal rights of man, followed Pufendorf very closely on that. But you're right. That's not what Christian nationalists want. They don't want my religion equal to your religion. If you're, I mean, well, your religion, but I mean, they want Christianity to be the dominant religion. And that's not equality.
And their whole tactic this year has been gerrymandering, going after way people are represented or not.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's not a consistent position. Uh, I mean, they basically are looking to, again, to score points, saying, here's this, sermon. It's got a lot of what the Declaration, they say it's a quote. Of course, it's not. But this sounds like the Declaration. Folks, this is evidence that the beginning of the nation was Christian. That's really all they're trying to do.
And that's where the consistency is they're consistently doing whatever they can to twist facts and make up myths in order to promote their own power.
That's how it looks to me.
So most people, work in their day-to-day jobs, they're probably going to hear statements like this from the Bartons, and they may have a sense that they're being played, but they're probably not going to have the knowledge or the time to go back and find 300-year-old documents and sort through them. Like, do you have any resources, including your own, that you can recommend for people following on a regular basis to help them process whenever these myths continue to pop up?
Well, you've just hit it. One of the hardest things about this is how do you fact check this? And, I found the documents basically on Google Books. And so just as a general response, I can say, if you hear something and want to check it out, Google Books is really a great resource. In the article that we're talking about that I wrote for my Substack, I have links to both of those essays. So, a really interested person could go click on those links, do a search for the words, all men, the phrases, all men are created equal and so forth. And of course you won't find them. This is not a claim that I took up in my book, The Christian Past, that wasn't, because I'd never heard it before. This was a new one on me. But I do take up quite a few others like this because they are similar in a way. There's a kernel of truth. I mean, there was a guy named John Wise. There are two sermons, and he does have words like equal. And I think there's John Wise quotes the Roman jurist Ulpian, where he writes, all men are born free. Well, that's close, but it's not a quote. And, the truth is the founders had plenty of other influences besides John Wise. There's no indication that Jefferson had any of Wise's books. And you can look up Jefferson's library. I mean, you can search his library to find out what books he had. He had books by Pufendorf, but not Wise. Now, a lot of that takes sleuthing out, and so that's why I wrote my book in a large measure, was because some of the more common stories are found in there. But this was a new one on me. I never heard Barton claim that the exact words to the Declaration were in a Congregationalist minister of the early 1700s.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you, continuing to pay attention to these things and then being willing to do the work to show us what the truth is and coming on here and sharing your thoughts with us.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. Please like, subscribe, and rate us on your favorite podcast platform. And we'll be back with another episode on Monday.
This has been another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. The episode you've just heard is part of a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State. Be sure to follow BNG daily at baptistnews.com and subscribe to get notifications about future episodes. Baptist News Global is a national nonprofit news service that is independent, free, and faithful. BNG is supported by readers and listeners like you. Learn more at baptistnews.com.
This episode was produced and edited by Mac Bowles of TKG Communications, LLC, Dallas, Texas.